Hi everyone, my name's Declan McGlynn and welcome to Friday Forum. Today we're joined by DJ and producer Jon Rundell, who'll be showing us how he built his new track Obsession using Logic Pro. So as a producer, Jon's tracks have reached the top of both the techno and main Beatport Top 100, as well as being on constant rotation by DJs like Richie Hutton, Joris Vaughan, Adam Beyer and Loco Dice. His remixes for the likes of Moby, Paul van Dyk and Carl Cox and residencies and slots in the world's biggest clubs have seen him rise to become one of the most in-demand DJs and producers in techno. So how you doing, man?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Good.
I was just sitting there wondering who wrote that.
That doesn't sound like me. No, man, it's great. So you use Logic, right?
Yes, yeah, I've been using Logic from day one of learning how to produce music, really.
Oh, yeah.
Main reason was that a lot of the people I was around at the time who I looked to for advice and who were inspiring me at the time in the London club scene were all using Logic.
So when was that?
I first started trying to learn it about 7 or 8 years ago. But I'd say it took me probably a couple of years until I felt really confident and comfortable with what I'd learned and that the tracks felt good enough to actually give out to people. Before that, it was a lot of trial and error, really. I used to sit there very frustrated for long days and evenings and, yeah, just couldn't work out why it wasn't sounding like other people's music, really.
Yeah. Was there a moment that you remember that you thought, oh, okay, a kind of like a eureka moment for
Yeah,
you?
definitely. I think there was one of my early releases on Intech, actually, a track called Dirty Disco, and it was quite a sort of, I basically sampled a lot of my record collection. I had a lot of disco records, soul, that kind of stuff, and loads of sort of early hip-hop records from sort of the US that I used to buy as a teenager and stuff like that, and I'd managed to throw these samples in there together, and something just clicked and gelled, and I managed to get the mix down reasonably okay. I took it to a friend and played it to him, and he said, yeah, this is good enough to start playing. So he played it a couple of times down at the end where we used to play some Sundays and stuff. And then eventually I gave it to Coxie, and it was he wanted to sign it. So
nice.
Yeah, that's kind of how it all started, really, and that gave me a little bit of a confidence booster in exploring further, really. And then I was just sort of making as much music as I possibly could after that, and as many different tracks as possible. And I think the thing for me was that I've been interested in so many different styles of music that I started trying to learn and teach myself how to make house records, drum and bass records, techno records, deep records, even, kind of poppy records for a little while, which I sort of soon stopped because it wasn't really me, it's not in my heart, you know. But the techno thing was the thing that was really my main passion, so that's where I find myself sitting here today, and everything that I've done within the tech house and techno side of things has always developed and evolved and morphed depending on little tips and tricks that I pick up along the way within Logic, or just general different approaches of how to even do your mix downs, or EQing things, or anything really, and also just general sort of trends inside your own head. Sometimes you can go out and hear another DJ and feel really inspired, and you take like something out of that and you try and translate that back down onto a
Even
page.
if it's in a genre maybe that you don't make.
Yeah,
definitely. Like the rhythms of what they play or something.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, over the years, certainly about 10 years ago when the BPMs of techno music was a lot quicker than it is now, people were taking a lot of inspiration from very tribal aspects, a lot of African flavours in there, Puerto Rican, Colombian, all kinds of different kind of, it kept the grooves going, and a lot of bongos and sort of things like that, whereas now I think it's got a bit more kind of heads down again, like it was maybe 15 years ago, where things were a bit tougher, but they were also a lot quicker then. And I think now the key to what I'm trying to do is retain the toughness, but at a slower BPM, but make it still have, like, it's got a real nice energy and groove to it, so that people can really get lost inside that and go with the record.
So was that your goal with Obsession?
Yeah, basically, yeah. I mean, this is quite a simple, stripped-back record, really. Again, I tend to focus on keeping things like that because I find that once you've mixed the record down, it seems to have a higher impact with the way that we play these records too, because you know, we can be using 3 to 4 decks at any one time, and so while we can have a track in front of us that might be 7 minutes long, everybody in the club might only hear 3 minutes of it. So the way I mix certainly lends itself to the more kind of loopy kind of techno side of things, and because it's quick mixing, and it kind of goes back to that sort of hip hop way of doing things, and it's not about blending the music together so much, and it's about really just kind of, you know, it's more technical, it's more hands-on while we play. So certainly in my back of my mind, I always have that in my head about how I approach making some of the tracks. So, you know, for example, we'll see on this particular one, there's a couple of drops. Sometimes some techno records only have 1 drop, and maybe they're a little bit more kind of there to be played in a much longer drawn out process, and they may take a little bit more of a while to arrive at a crescendo point before then kind of stripping themselves back down again. Whereas, you know, I'm kind of all out from the word go and then just build and build and build. Yeah, pretty much, yeah. And it's almost like the breaks are actually the rest point, and then once the kick drum kicks back in again, then it's all, you know, it's off and go and full on energy, and hopefully everybody's getting down.
Yeah, so your arrangements are very much informed by your DJ sets?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't say I would delve too deep into sort of very intrinsic and transitional moments in records. Maybe the older I get in the future, I may decide to explore that. But for now, I'm very happy doing what I'm doing, and you know, as long as the records are working in the clubs, then I'm happy.
So yeah, how do you usually start your tracks? Is it with the kick drum?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's an obvious thing to start with, and I think most people you'd ever talk to would use it as a reference point to build from, because I think it's such a dominant part of what we do, really. If for me, when I'm listening to demos, certainly that are coming into Intech as well, if the kick drum isn't solid, basically, then the rest of the demo is going to really suffer. So it's very hard to sort of take it on board that the person's quite serious about what they're doing. They may just be starting to learn to find their feet, for example. But I think, again, you know, if you can use tracks that inspire you as references and say, okay, well, that kick drum sounds really forceful, very kind of popping out, or, you know, how do I get that to happen? And again, it's pure trial and error, and it's taken me a long time to find certain kicks that I can then manipulate to become sounding like they're even stronger than perhaps they are in their original form. But I think it's kind of, for me, it's about the roundness and the depth of what's in the kick drum. Again, the things I do to them are generally pretty simple. So if we start with this one here, for example, I took this kick drum off an old R&S record, actually, if I'm allowed to say that. Only one hit, and then basically just formed an arrangement with it, and I've bounced it down as a stem here. So to play it on its own right now, as you can hear, there's a slight little bit of reverb on it, which is off the original sample that I took. But what I've done here, the main point is that EQing on the kick drum, if you can see that, I've just taken a little bit off there, so that basically what it does is that it pops the kick drum to sound even sort of tougher, and it helps with later on in the mix, especially when the next part I come to, which is usually the bass line. It kind of helps to make sure that, along with the sidechaining process of other parts, that the kick drum is always front and centre, and it's always a thing that's kind of really kind of hitting you, and it's what you latch onto. It's how you know, your feet will go to the kick drum when you're on the dance floor. So that's a very simple thing to cut out some of that frequency there. Another thing I sometimes do, I've done it on this one, I don't always do it, it depends on the vibe and the mood of the track, but I bus certain things. Now, for example, on here, I've set up a bus on the third one, which has a bit of compression and limiting on it, and I haven't changed any of the settings on those. They're at the standard setting, and it just helps with a little bit of mix for me, and the way my ears are kind of in tune with the record. Now, I don't do it on every single record. This one I have done it, and it'll become more clearer later on as to why. So the second part of what we do, once we've got the kick drum in a good place and we're very happy with it, and we've determined the BPM, this one's at 126, always the bass line next. I'm quite known for kind of getting together grooves, really. Bass line's a very strong part of that for me, so I do spend a lot of time trying to find good sounds and good arrangement patterns and for bass lines, because again, it's something that really draws people into a record, and it kind of, it's almost like the hypnotic part of what you're doing to a degree. So on the bass line, because this is bust, you can hear a little bit of the percussion on it as well, but you get the idea of the bass line in here. Now, you can still hear the kick drum really kicking through. Another part of the reason for that is sidechaining. So what I do on the compressor within Logic, I set up an extra channel within it. So I have pulse up and pulse down. But for sidechaining, I always go pulse down. And again, the reason is that you get this kind of like suction effect going on, and it makes the bass line sound like it's moving more than it actually does. I will do that on most parts within the record, and again that goes back to the kick drum, making sure that it's still front and centre and it's still really cutting through the mix. Claps. This is a 909 clap. It's one of my favourite claps, to be honest. It's always very popular within the techno community. You know, that drum machine in particular is well renowned within, you know, the early days of techno music from the guys in Detroit. And again, I've added a little bit of compression on it and a side chain to go with it. So again, it helps with just creating this kind of feel to the record that doesn't sort of organically exist, if that makes sense. It's, you know, you're manipulating it, and I find that for me when I'm doing that, it helps everything become more swingy and more groovy. And again, because that's kind of almost like my trademark, I don't think for quite some time that I'll ever change that, unless there's another technique that comes along that I can learn that will help me do that. Next up on the hats, this one in particular is quite a full-on hat. Now originally, if we just start like that, now you can hear that, it's quite hissy. So in order to avoid some of that, I've taken some bottom end off, which I've just done on the standard EQ. So if you actually take that off, you can hear just this little kind of clipping and some kind of little bottom end noise. Now again, later on in the mix down, that could get a little bit messy. So we just take that out. And the easy way we do that is we just put that on. And you can see just here where the fader is, you can manipulate it like that, and you can manipulate it like that. And it slightly alters the sound. And now it's kind of cleaner, and it's focusing on the area of the part that is most prominent. Later, I'll do some high cut on it as well on this one because of the way I introduce it in the arrangement, which we can talk about in a little while. And again, I've sidechained this on the pulse down. So I've done that on most parts, as you can see. Another hat, this one, slight little kind of shake to it as well. I think hats and me are kind of, we have this sort of relationship where I used to put too much of them in. And then it's kind of like later on I started to learn that actually less is more. And it's really about, again, how you're mixing and how you're spreading everything and separating certain sounds. You can kind of go a bit too crazy, and it's quite hard sometimes to sort of hold yourself back. So
yeah, I think with rhythm, you know, it's about what's not there a lot of the time.
Yeah, but if you play these last two hats alongside each other, they complement each other now. They're at different depths.
Yeah.
They're not in the same frequency range, and I think that took me a while to learn how to do as well and understand a bit more as well. So the third one I've got, that is in a similar range to the first hat, but again, it's just kind of sat back in the mix on this one at the moment. And then you have, this one is a lot more of a shaker. Again, I've kept this quite central, and then I have got extra shakers in. Now on these, if you can see just here, I usually use two, and I go one left and one right. Now again, it kind of, it really needs a, you know, when you're on the sound systems, and especially in like a, you know, like a treated room where you've got amazing monitors, you can hear these really subtle differences, and it makes the record sound like it's spread more, and it's a lot more in stereo. So you can do this on many more parts if you wish, but I think if you overdo it, it does sound a bit kind of weird, and then you end up with just like the kick drum and the bass line in the middle, and nothing else kind of really sitting on top of it as such. So you lose a little bit of drive. So shakers is something that I generally tend to do that on quite a bit. And then that's generally how I built the track, how you've seen it in that order. So kick drum, bass line, clap, hats, any other percussion parts that add a good element of groove. Now I haven't used a lot of kind of mid-range stuff in here on this particular record. I did try some things, but they weren't really gelling and they weren't really fixing the mood that I wanted to get into this record. So I decided to just keep it very linear in terms of just straight up techno, fall to the floor, just have hits,
and
basically.
For like effects and sweeps and stuff like that, which is very important in techno as well. I mean,
Yeah.
Do you use any like synth plugins for that, or do you have samples that you go to? Or?
I tend to, I mean, further down on the arrangement page here, it can be a mixture, to be honest. I mean, I think for effects, I tend to use sample packs, if I'll be brutally honest, and I don't think you'll find many people that don't these days. I mean, they've become so much better than they used to be. If we just play these two here. So this is a reverse effect.
It's quite subtle, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just really subtle. It's not overbearing, it's just there to complement. It's not the main feature of the track. The main feature of the track at this point is the energy of the groove. Well, throughout most of the record until the breakdowns. But as you can see on here, really, I've set up two buses. The first bus is some reverb with a little bit of compression on it as well, just to give it that nice popping out feel to it. Now the reverb helps create a little bit of atmosphere to the sound and a little bit of delay, which I've EQ'd as well. So but again, these are all really subtle. I've only EQ'd a tiny little amount here, and I've only put a tiny little bit of delay on. And I think again, it's just learning that you don't have to max everything out. You don't have to go right up 3/4 of the way up. As you can see here on the reverb, it's a very, very small amount. On the bus, it's a little bit more delay because the part's quite short. And there's certain points when I was introducing things in the records that I would like that sort of atmospheric thing to just kind of keep there a little bit, and it helps introduce, in this particular instance, the lead sound, which we'll come to in a second. The other part that I've used to complement this and back this up is a reverse cymbal. Very nice, very clean, very instant kind of finish. But again, I've done exactly the same on it. Some reverb, some delay, same buses. Also added the sidechain to it so that when it's in the mix, it gives it this kind of as opposed to and that's what I love about sidechaining, to be honest. I can't talk about it enough.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know many dance producers for sure in most genres now that don't do it.
But I mean, it's great at creating a rhythm and varying the volume of certain things throughout the mix, but it's also very good in terms of frequency, because no frequency ever becomes too loud because it's sidechained by something else in a similar frequency range.
Yeah, unless you kind of drop something out that's not, and then it just pops up really loud in the mix. Yeah. If you take the kick drum out, for example, or again, it's trial and error. All of this is complete trial and error, and it's the best advice I could give to anybody. I mean, I think the good thing about these days is that there are these videos now online that people can look at and watch, and it's a free resource for people. Not to want to sound like back in the day we had it really hard, because I'm not from even way back, but we didn't have access to this, and it was literally like you talk to a few people in the club, but it's loud, you can't always hear what they're saying, and they're not about to start writing down particular frequencies if you need to drop off certain parts and things like that. You just want to have a couple of beers and a chat, really. And actually the ones that did, you kind of tended, the ones that actually did want to write that down, you kind of tended to avoid because you were out trying to have a good time. So, it really was, and still is, even if you watch these tutorials or videos online, the only thing you can do is just get your head down and get in it, and you will get frustrated and you will be bashing your head against a brick wall, but then all of a sudden something clicks and it drops, and then you have this sort of enthusiasm after that. You just try everything and you just keep going, and you keep going further and further and further. And the thing is, even the way I'm producing now, it probably won't be the same as the way I might do it in 5 years' time, because you know you keep learning and you keep trying new techniques, or maybe there's a technique that somebody does in a completely different style of music and you try and apply that to what we do and it might work, you know. And then, you know, like people weren't sidechaining, I don't know, what, 7, 8, 9 years ago maybe, you know, but now it's like almost like an industry standard, you know. It should have its own kite mark, you know. It's like so, you know, it's interesting how things can evolve and stuff like that. And I mean, it brings this energy, and that's the thing that brings me in. And I think producing music as well has helped my DJing. Actually, it helps me understand, you know, how to play certain records at certain times, how to see how people are reacting to certain things. You know, in terms of using effects outside of, you know, these little sections here. I mean, if we move to the break, I'll show you what I've done with the vocal in terms of affecting. This really is, this is another thing I actually got off of like a documentary. It was like a real kind of, it sounds like it's out of a film because I've made it sound like that, but actually it's quite a normal spoken word thing. And I can't remember what documentary it was in, but I heard it, and luckily I was recording it anyway, and then I managed to take it off the program, and there it was sitting in Logic.
So do you remember what it was you did to make that sound? Did you pitch it down? Or?
Yeah, it's pitched down, and it's also got Bit Crusher on it, which gives it this kind of edginess to it, I guess. It's slightly more intriguing, it sounds a bit more sort of horror. You know, this is quite a, not dark track, but it's quite a pounding track, so it kind of suits the vibe. Now, I've moved on the Bit Crusher here just slightly, the downsampling to ×3. I've pulled the resolution down to 5-bit, and I've actually pushed the drive to 19.5 because it adds a bit more of that edgy rawness to it. If we take it off, you can see that the volume's dropped. And the other thing I've always noticed with Bit Crusher, and I don't know why, maybe you'll be able to tell me while we're here, is that any vocal that you put Bit Crusher on, it creates almost like this stereo spreading of it, and it actually pops it up in volume a little bit too. So actually on the mix it's quite low as a result. Now I've bussed the reverb and the delay on it too. Sometimes with vocals like this, to get them to sound like that, I may even use some phase distortion, which again is just, you know, most of what I'm doing is purely Logic in-house stuff. There's not too many external plugins that I'll use. Sometimes you can get some really cool things going in Effectrix or Echo Boy, but I think for me, again, they're more groove-led things, or more kind of things. If you're making records with sort of quick drops in, you can add some really cool sort of quirky mad sounds in, you know, of a part, and just create a new channel, drop it in, and what have you. But certainly with things like this, I mean, if I put the phase distortion on now, this is going to sound really weird. But you can see already that it's kind of, you know, usually I'll put the resonance right up and I'll just play. Now it doesn't sound right there, but I can pull it back and it should sound. Now it's taken a slightly different element. It's still got that eeriness to it, it's still got the edgy rawness to it, but it's too much, really. It's fine with just a Bit Crusher on. So again, you've got to think about the record as a whole and the whole vibe of it, and not also each individual part, because you could go down a road and try all this stuff with it soloed and then, you know, go back to the record and it just doesn't suit the record at all.
Yeah, so can we hear that in the context of the breakdown?
Yeah.
Then? Yeah.
So I've only used it in the main breakdown here. The reason for that is because, again, it just didn't really fit the groove. Now, I could have spent longer to chop the vocal up a bit more and make it sit within the groove, and I did do that. But actually, when I went back, like I just explained, it just wasn't really working, it wasn't right. And I thought, well, why not make the breakdown a little bit more distinctive, you know? Just have it in the break and then just forget about it. Another reason for that is because when it kicks back in quite full on, and that's the point where you want everybody to get their heads back down. and I have a lead line in it too, and it was kind of conflicting with that, but the two on their own within the record, separated, still kept the groove, still kept the energy, and it's actually quite cool to flick between. Now again on this break here, for the latter half of it, we've actually done some automation over the master channel. Now what we've got going on here, you can see here, this is just again a basic bit of sort of, not mastering, but you know, it helps me with my setup at home, because you know, I'm not in a treated room at home. I'm literally, you know, trying to do all the tips and tricks that I've learned that I can get away with at home before I take it, get it mixed down properly. So this just really helps me with getting it to a point where everything sounds clear. Now this here, the FF Sympion, it's a fab filter. You can see it moving here, this is a free plugin you can get online. You just Google it and you can download it, and it's brilliant for filtering. I love it. It's absolutely amazing. It's really clean, it's really smooth. If we go to the actual part itself, you'll be able to see that on filter 2, it's all about taking off some of the frequency. So you can see I've done it in these two
just
breaks.
doing what a DJ would do if they were playing.
Pretty much, yeah. It's the same as on any kind of mixer where you know you have your filter, and it's essentially doing the same thing. Interestingly enough, we always end up trying to do even more still though when we're on the mixer and we're actually in the club. So
that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I mean, how much of as a DJ is also a producer, do you prefer it when a lot of those effects are pre-printed onto the actual track, or would you prefer something that just kind of rolls on and lets you play with it as a DJ?
Yeah, I think to be honest, the way I play, I'm much more hands-on, so I'd get pretty bored if it was already in the record. So I do like to add my own kind of take on it, and also there's kind of certain records you'll play in certain ways, and you might only hear a couple of minutes of that record, but you might be able to affect something up to help create some tension, because the people in the crowd might be ready for that
even
at
if
that
it's
point.
not in the track itself.
Yeah. So, you know, maybe I would do that in the mix earlier on in the club, but at this point, within this record, it helps create an anticipation of when it's going to come and kick back in. It's like get ready, get ready, get ready, get ready, and then it's in. So the other thing I've done here is also filter the peak, and you can hear that kind of gradual bottom end really going away, and now it's focusing on the top end. And because it's doing that, I've added echo onto it. And there's so many different levels of echo that you can do. I mean, echo within Logic is awesome. I really, really love it. It's so clean, and it's so kind of simple to do. And on this one, you can see the automation here right now, moving on the wet channel. So again, it's only very, very subtle, and it's not ramped out. It's not to the, you know, I can't stress that enough actually. I mean, if you look on all the drops, it's not even halfway. So again, it's got to be so subtle because of the way the record drops back in. You don't want it then rolling on, because the focus has to be back on the kick drum, the bass line, the groove of the record. The space design, I've done the same thing for reverb, and again, it's a in-house Logic plugin. You know, it's what it comes with, and you can make it sound like this. You know, it's just really about experimenting and finding the right levels to create that. So now when we kick it in, it's just, and it's straight in. And all those parts have stopped on the automation at the right point to be able to then not have them carry over and it sound messy or dirty or whatever, or muddy or whatever you want to call it. And now the focus is again back on that kick drum and on the groove. I haven't mentioned the ride yet, which is also a very good, simple thing to use as a piece of energy to lift the track up at any point. Don't really do a great deal to the ride, to be honest. You know, again, it's a standard 909 ride. So, you know, it's literally about just getting it arranged into the right place of the record, so it's and it's on the off and off it goes. Now this lead line is the kind of final part really within this record. It will play it on its own. Now this is something I did actually create, even though it's an audio file right now, because I bounce the stems down to then take them to get them mixed down somewhere, and it's easier to do that instead of, you know, just take the whole project with me. Sometimes it's because we use some slightly different software to mix stuff down, so and it's just it's how we work within that studio. Now this, if we just get this looped up, because of the high cut on that as well. So this is the sound on its own. Now the way I created this sound was I actually went into the XS24, again, standard Logic, and I have these sounds here. This is just a selection for now. All kinds of different sounds. This actually started life as a piano, believe it or not.
Right.
And what we did was basically what I was describing earlier. And I've still left a little bit of that on for effect with the bit crusher. So it's bit crushed, phase distorted, and it's got echo on it. And it came out sounding like that from a piano. Yeah. But I mean, like a Detroit type of piano.
Yeah,
it wasn't
right,
like a classical.
Yeah, that's
classical. Yeah. So and again, it's just through. I learned that off of somebody else. I didn't make that up. It's not mine. I can't lay claim to it. But I do love using it, and I do use it. And I think for techno records, especially that when you're trying to get that kind of real raw industrial warehouse type thing, it's perfect. I mean, if you just listen to the sound on its own, it's all there.
I guess because the piano's got so many harmonics.
Yeah.
When you bit crush it,
yeah,
they get brought up in the mix. So.
Yeah, and it's also made it sound like it's doing more than it is by having the certain level of echo on it. So you hear that. That lower bottom sound, and then the second and third, they weren't originally there, but it's because of the echo, and for some reason the echo's picked up on some lower end sound that I didn't, it's like probably towards the end of the note maybe, and there it is, and it just sounds really cool. So it's amazing what you can do.
Example of trial and error, like you said before.
Yeah, I mean, other things I might do with lead sounds. I mentioned Effectrix earlier. It's a great plug-in from Sugar Bytes. Again, you can just flick through and it'll do all kinds of mad stuff. I mean, you can even change it yourself if you want. You don't have to stay on these presets, or you can add and draw things in. So if I wanted to stretch part of it, doesn't sound so good, so you take it out. You try something else. It's as simple as that, really. I mean, I wouldn't use that, but you could use and manipulate parts of that. So, you could take that out. Now you've got a kind of slightly different groove within it.
And then that in turn is affected by the delay and...
Yeah, by everything that's already there.
Yeah.
Effectrix is brilliant. It's such good fun. I'd recommend to anybody to certainly get a copy of that, and it doesn't cost that much to get either, so which is always an added bonus, because you're getting armed with all these things, and sometimes you can have too much choice and you end up getting confused about what to use. So again, I would always say keep things clear, keep things simple, keep your workflow as simple as possible. And, if you want to get intricate later on, then you can go back to the record and do those things later on. But for me and for techno, simple is best.
Yeah, sure.
Not always quite as interesting to talk about, but
no, it's self-valid, and I mean simplicity is really important in the club as well, because you don't want to overdo it and people get distracted and the groove loses the groove a little bit.
And also I think if you're kind of overdoing the records and overcomplicating them as well, it kind of puts people off playing them actually. So you obviously would like people to play these records too, but also be happy with them and proud of what you've done. So if we just play this now in the full context of the record, again it's very heads down, it's still within the groove. The pattern or the perceived pattern within it is very important to go with the bass line and the rest of the percussion, otherwise it just wouldn't work and it sounds so out of place. Couple other things that we've done here as well. You'll hear this fading down, so you can see on here that I've added a high cut. Now I actually do the high cut on the automation again. I always leave that box ticked on, so then I can just do this. And there you can see the automation of the high cut. So there it is louder, and it just slowly, gradually just moves down. And then if we go back to the master, you can see that I then use another little drop. This is kind of really is a mixing tool for me at this point, you know. There will by now be another record in with this record, if I'm playing it, and certain other techno DJs I know as well. And I haven't used the hi cut on here, but it's almost like this is like the exit point of the record almost. So I'll keep it in the mix, but from this point on, really, it's really this record's getting faded out and the other one will be coming in. But as you can see, there's only a couple of minutes really there, not even to mix. So I'll probably start the other record from probably where the break comes in, but you won't start hearing it until this drop here. So again, it's all about creating a slightly different anticipation moment. You know, I may have even dropped out the bass by now on the mixer, and another bass line's coming in. And again, you know, people can use things like mixed in key to work out harmonics, but just use your ears, to be honest. There's no discredit to mixed in key. I think it's a great piece of software, but I think your ears, you just know, you know? And if you don't, then you've got to really start to get your ears in tune with what's going on.
You can't automate everything.
No, no. So there you have it. That's how I generally build a techno record.
Yeah, nice.
Not much else for me to talk about.
Just one final thing I wanted to ask you then. On the, you know, in terms of the master channel, there's a lot of automation things and space designer and stuff. Is there anything you put on? You mentioned you mix in a different studio, but is there a plugin that you always go to as a kind of full masterer?
I think for mastering, for full-on mastering in particular, you know, to get it to a point where it sounds really good in the club, we always do two different mix down. So I go to a guy, Alex Teplo's studios in Dalston, and I'll take like 7 or 8 tracks with me, and we'll literally go through every part, make sure it's mixed down nicely before we then do this kind of semi-mastering that we do there. So I'll have like a DJ master that I will use to test out in the clubs, and then we'll have a pre-master as well, which we lower the volume of everything and we give a mastering engineer in a studio plenty of room to be able to push the sound of that record. Again, a very, very important thing to do, because if I sent our semi-mastered version to him, he's got no headroom. And that's another really big reason as to why the records can sound so powerful within the club, above and beyond maybe other people's records. So the main master plugin that we would use is usually, I mean, Cambridge do some fantastic UAD stuff. It's so good. I mean, it's to be able to replicate the original analog stuff in such a good way, it's just unreal. And again, it's only subtleties, you know. It's I think when you first start producing, the tendency is to just ramp and max everything out, and you know, everything's redlining and it's peaking. I mean, even on here you can see, I mean, on the master volume, there's no even yellow, and it still sounds strong, and it still sounds full, and it still sounds powerful. And we're very conscious of that too when we're doing the mastering on it. So, I mean, those for sure are the best things I think I could recommend, and they seem to be so compatible with something like Logic. I'm not sure how they work with other software, to be honest, but for me, I can't recommend those enough. They're not cheap, but I think if you really care about what you're doing, that is something within making music that you really have to care about, because that will separate your records apart from being played or not being played by the DJs that you look up to and the ones that inspire you back in return to make this music. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, man, nice one. Cheers for coming in. That was ace. Thank you for having me. I kind of feel like I have to go make music now. Good. Guess that's the idea. Yeah. All right, cheers, guys. Well, we're back next Friday with another live session, so we'll see you then.